Welcome to today's webinar, Small Things, Big Impact, Shaping Your Unique Digital Journey. So we will learn why it's not good or rarely even possible to copy successes of other organizations. We're also going to go through a few small steps that any organization can try with relatively low risk in order to make significant progress on their own unique digital journey, which is more adapt to the culture that they have. And you will also learn how to move faster from where you actually are instead of starting over again, as so many different processes prescribe. So we're going to look at how we can move from the position we're in instead of uprooting everything and starting over again with a new process or a new way of working. So the first obvious question that we need to tackle is this whole idea of why should we even change? Most people that join these webinars, most people that come to my sessions or contact me, they are already in a good position. They're running a pretty good business. They have a good product. They have paying customers, pretty successful teams. So all in all, they're doing good. So if we're doing good, why should we change? Well, there's actually two answers to that question. One answer is because you're joining these webinars, you're going to these sessions, you're contacting me because you're not happy with good, you want to be better. And that in itself is good, that there's a striving towards becoming better than we were yesterday. The second answer to that question is because the context around us is going to change. So what we're doing today might not work tomorrow. So since the context is changing, we need to be able to change with the context. If we talk about successful product development, which is the thing I really want to talk about, because project development or projects are, in my book, pretty dead. The whole idea of projects, we talked about digitalization projects before. They have this idea, this notion of that things have a beginning and an end. You know, we will be done with our digitalization, or we will be done with our new platform, or we will be done with the software. The truth is you're never done. And that's why products are a much better analogy. And when we think about product development, we think about things that we're constantly adding to, constantly improving on, and constantly working on. So you think about what you're working on as a product, it's never going to be done. So you need to work on continuously. In the same way, if you think about your digitalization journey, that's never going to be done. So you need to continuously evolve your digitalization journey. You can't just say, well, we're digital and we're done. And this is a quote from Yvon Chouinard, who is the founder of Patagonia. And he said, how you climb a mountain is more important than reaching the top. And this is so true, specifically because there's a world before Patagonia and after Patagonia in mountain climbing. Patagonia revolutionized climbing gear and completely changed how you climb the mountain. Sure, the top was the same, but the journey there was faster, safer, more comfortable, and possible for more people to do. So this is what we're trying to communicate here. There's a huge value in how you approach the journey. And you know, mostly product development is subject to some kind of ways of working or a process. So the idea here becomes, unless you change the process, unless you change the journey, how you approach the journey in the same way that Patagonia changed how you climbed the mountain, you're going to reach the same conclusion over and over again. You're going to have the same output from your process, the same quality, the same speed, the same anything. So if you're interested in being better in your digitalization journey, your processes have to change. So let's then talk about why we're not just going for the best process, because obviously there has to be a best process. There's one process to rule them all, and I could just tell you that process in this presentation, and we could all go have an early lunch and everything would be fine. The truth is, there is no best process. There's many processes that are good processes, and there might be best processes for a specific context or a specific company. But there's no overall best process that's going to fit everyone. There's no one size fits all process. So best is contextual at best. It's subject to the context it exists in. And to illustrate this, let me show you innovation processes from 3 of the top most digital product companies. The companies that everybody looks at and goes like, I want to be like that company. If we could only be like those companies, everything would be fine. And I'm going to ask you if you have what it takes to implement any of their processes. So Netflix innovation processes: think big, start small, scale fast. The reason Netflix can work like this is because they have a crazy focus on product managers. They move beyond product owners. They have product managers that take accountability and responsibility for the results of the product and work tenaciously in order to deliver those things. Amazon runs the whole day one. It's always day one of the internet. The famous quote from Jeff Bezos's first letter to investors. This means it's never too late to start, and there's always something we can do. And the way Amazon delivers on this is that they always start from the customer and work backwards. The classical writing a press release and then trying to figure out the product afterwards. And this works because of the type of leadership and culture that Jeff Bezos has instilled inside of Amazon and inside of the company. Spotify have a huge focus on experimentation. And the way they view experimentation is that it always starts with a problem. And a problem in Spotify's book is formed as a decision. We need to go either right or left. Then they look at localization. Does this problem look the same in all different regions of the world? Because they have so much data to see how people react in the US versus how people react in Sweden versus how they would react in for instance, France. And then they break it apart, because no problem is so big that you have to work on the whole problem. You can always find a smaller piece. And then they design experiments to try those out. Did this solve the problem, or did that solve the problem? The reason they could do this is because they have a strong focus on experimentation and trying new things, but also a ridiculously strong technical platform that was built into the company from the beginning that allows this type of experimentation in different types of locations with different types of demographics. Now, if you look at your company and your culture and your edge, are they anything like any of these companies? Probably not. So why do you think that the processes that work in these companies are going to work at your company? Because you might just not have what it takes in order to do it the way they do it. But there are similarities. While all 3 companies do prioritize customer centricity and innovation, I think your company should too. But what they do is that they found a way to do this that speaks to their unique culture and their unique company philosophies. And I think you should do that too. And even if you go on the inside of these companies, you look at the people that actually published a lot of the processes that are running in these companies, even they are going to tell you that it's not something that you should copy. Because it simply describes how things work at Spotify. It's not something you should take and copy. And the truth is that this actually might work. It might work for a company if you ever had a clean slate. But honestly, when was the last time you had the benefit of starting clean, without any baggage, without any other preconceived notions? Most of the clients I work with have been in business for 60, 70, maybe 100 of years. They have physical products and processes and cultures, and all of those things are good. So we shouldn't throw those things out. We should just figure out how those things play in the new world. So it's very rare we get to start from zero. And this is also why you should be wary of processes that promise to solve all your digital problems. Processes like SAFe that say, if we can just roll out this major reorg, everything is going to be fine. Because it's not, because SAFe does not understand your unique culture, it does not understand your company, and it does not understand your product. And if we wonder how these processes at these top companies were created, they were not designed overnight. What happened was, it's a continuous stream of small iterative improvements. So these processes were also discovered in those companies. They have evolved naturally. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. How can you evolve your processes naturally in a way that they're going to fit your company culture? And the first key to doing all of this is starting where you are. So taking stock of the good things you have in your company, the things that are working for you. I already mentioned it before. Most companies, they have products that clients are willing to pay for. They have happy clients, they have teams that are able to deliver things. So those things we should appreciate. So start where you are. Don't try to reinvent everything. The next step is probably the obvious step, and the one step I always implement at a client if it's not already there. And it's the habit of doing continuous improvement. So before you try anything else, make sure that you have a set process for doing continuous improvement. This can be as easy as practicing regular effective retrospectives. And a lot of companies have problems with retrospectives. A lot of companies tried retrospectives and don't like them. And when I come in and try to help companies with broken down retrospectives, usually what I walk into is a joint therapy session. It's a session for all the people of the team to talk about, what they are angry about or what's not working. It's not a session to find better ways of working. So if you want to run effective retrospectives, the retrospectives are not working for you, consider getting a coach, consider getting someone who can help you run effective retrospectives. And there's a lot of things I could teach you about this here and now, but this is a short presentation, so I'm not going to go into all the details of running these effective retrospectives. But I'm going to tell you one thing. If you have a problem with your retrospectives, make sure that the product that comes out of your retrospective is one actionable item with clear accountability. One actionable item with clear accountability. Not a list of items, not 20 items, not 3, 1. Because one item is probably what you can solve. And if you have clear accountability, you also know who is accountable for solving that thing. And that's going to be a very good start. So establishing continuous improvement through retrospectives with the goal of every retrospective designing one actionable item with clear accountability. And when we talk about continuous improvement, I usually view this as working with the context or within the context. We're not changing the context. We're just moving around inside of the context and adapting our processes or ways of working to whatever is happening to us or outside of us. If you have this down, the next thing you need to figure out is measurements. So we need to talk about measuring things. And when I say measure what you want, I don't mean, measure whatever you want. I mean measure what you want. So measure what you want to get out of it. And I'm not going to tell you what measurements are good for your company, but I will tell you that whatever you try to measure is exactly what you're going to get. So when I walk into companies and I see measurements of story points, features delivered, hours worked, or even worse, lines of code delivered, I understand that that system will be gamed, and that's exactly what that company is going to get. It's going to get hours, or it's going to get story points, or it's going to get features. But it's rarely what that company is actually interested in getting. Usually companies want, things like, we want to have higher retention rates on our platform. We want less abandoned shopping carts. Or maybe they're interested in having higher profits or higher revenue or whatever. These are the things that companies are actually interested in. But it's rarely those things that the digital teams are measured on. So pick metrics that actually reflect what you want your digital teams to deliver, and then be transparent about it. Don't lock those metrics up in some secret Excel spreadsheet and then tell the teams you're measuring them on something else. Be very transparent about what they're measured on. And don't pick 20 metrics. Maybe pick 3, or even better, pick 1. I walk into companies and I see these huge spreadsheets with business scorecards and KPIs that are more than 1 screen high. And that's ridiculous. No organization can have that many measurements and navigate that many things. There's always one measurement that's more prioritized right now for your organization, and that's the one you should be navigating with. So once you have that down, you have the continuous improvement, you have the measurements, you're starting where you are. Now we can talk about interesting part. And this is deliberate disruption. So what do I mean by deliberate disruption? For me, deliberate disruption is the idea of throwing the process out of balance, the ways of working out of balance, just a little. Not so much, it's like, pushing a friend in a friendly way. Not so much that they're going to trip and fall and hurt themselves, but enough that they're going to find their footing in a different position and see a different vantage point or maybe a different course. So deliberate disruption is about working on the context. So if continuous improvement is working within the context, deliberate disruption is working on the context. It's actually changing the context, changing the parameters in order to elicit or create a reaction or response in the process. And the reason you might want to do this, I'm not saying everybody should, but the reason you might want to do this is if you've been running your process improvements for a while, eventually all processes move towards order. And when you have order, you don't really have innovation. Everything is just kind of the same all the time. Every iteration or every cycle of your development feels the same. You're not really changing that much and you're kind of just shrugging on. It feels boring. It's not fun to work anymore. This is when you know you need to disrupt something. So if you feel stagnated, this might be the way of doing it. And this is not comfortable. What happens with this is when you start doing this, you start seeing thrashing. People get upset, teams get upset. Things don't really work. But that might be a good thing because this is a process that promotes action over inaction. It promotes doing something instead of not doing it. Even if that something might not be the best thing to do at the time, it's at least an action. And these steps should be small enough so you can roll them back. So let's talk about a 5-step process in order to shift context, in order to change things in a way that's going to force your process to adapt. So this exercise alone can be done alone by a leader as a thought experiment, or you can do it as a workshop with the team. And I think doing it as a workshop with the team is even better. Because you should be transparent about what you're doing. That's going to make adoption easier. And please don't run off after I've told you step 1 and try to implement this. You really need to listen to the whole thing, get to the end of the webinar. It's really important. Otherwise, you're going to be in a very bad spot. So the first step is to create a list of 10 things that list 10 things that you could add to your current process situation, way of working, to radically or subtly improve your product development. Now, I've listed 5 pretty generic things, but when you do this list, you should be very specific. So I just put add people here, but be specific. Add what type of people or what person specifically. Add budget. How much budget? For what? Expand audience. To what audience? And this I mean audience for the product. We're not only targeting 18 to 30-year-olds, we're going 30 to 60 as well. Or add platforms. We're also going to target smartwatches instead of just targeting mobile phones and desktops. Or add technology. We want to throw some AI into the mix and see what happens. Large language models are all the hype. And so on and so forth. And you really need 10 because the 5 first ones are going to be really easy for you to write down. And the cool ideas are going to come in like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Because that's when your brain really starts being creative. So we did this with one client where we decided to actually scale up from 1 team to 2 teams. And the obvious idea was that if we scale up to 2 teams, we're going to move twice as fast. So we split the current team into 2 teams, filled it up with new people in both teams. And of course, that was hard in the beginning. The benefit of that was that not only did we go more than double as fast, we also needed to adapt our ways of working. Because when you have 2 teams, you can't have the ad hoc communication that we used to have with the business. Now we need to have more formal plannings. We moved from a cycle of Scrum to a more fluent model of Kanban because we needed to be able to adapt to the business better. And since we formalized a lot of the communications, support, and a lot of other functions also became improved. And this comes with scale, because when you scale, you have to run things differently. And this was something we didn't perceive when we decided to go bigger in the beginning, that we would have this benefit of a more formal process change that would help us structure our development and support. Next list is make it smaller. It's the exact opposite of the previous list. What things could you actually subtract from your process, your product, in order to radically or subtly improve it? Here I want you to list 10 things as well. And same thing, remove people, but be specific. What person will we remove and why? Remove budget, shrink the audience. We're not going to target everyone. We're just going to go for teenagers. Remove a platform. We're scrapping desktop completely, because who uses desktop anymore? Or remove a technology that's obsolete or that doesn't really create benefit for you, and so on and so forth. You need to go to 10 here as well, because again, innovation happens in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is where you're going to get the cool ideas. And we did this with one client where we had a product that we were supposed to build, and we were very unsure about whether the product was even good or not. So the way to elicit a response at that point was basically to remove 75% of the budget. So we made a budget cut of 75%. Naturally, the team was not a little upset. They were very upset, because on 25% of the initial budget, what could you possibly deliver? But after that kind of calmed down, they picked the team members that were going to be on the new team and tried to figure out what they could do with only 25% of the budget. Obviously, they would not be able to deliver on the product, but what they could do was deliver on a fake door, which is basically a fake product on the internet that tells people, you could have this product, but when you try to sign up for it, it doesn't exist. And the rest of the budget they spent on newspaper ads to attract people into that website. The cool thing about that was we learned that product was completely useless. Nobody really wanted it. Nobody really signed up for it. So we actually saved 75% of the budget. But the process improvement that came out of this was that this type of experimentation, proof of concept, early releasing became a habit for this team. So all of a sudden, we now created a completely new way of working just because we forced a change in the context at one point. Next one is make it different. And here it's about mixing things up that would radically or subtly improve or change your process. So maybe change roles, maybe you let people step up to take an architect or a tech lead role or a design lead role that haven't previously had that role. Or change target audiences. We take this whole product and we pivot it from women 18 to 25 to men 25 to 35, and what would happen then? We change the business model. We go from a licensing model to a subscription model, or we completely change platforms. We're shutting down desktop, and we're delivering a new mobile experience instead. Switching teams, this is maybe you have two teams working on separate products. What if they swapped products and worked on each other's products? So I'm not saying all of these ideas are good, right? They don't have to be good ideas. They just have to be 10 ideas. Because amongst those 10, there are going to be at least 1 or 2 that are good. And so on and so forth. Again, make them specific, go all the way to 10. By now, you understand where this is going. The last list I want you to make is the what if list. And this is the list that every company has, but nobody actually writes down. This is the list about all the things that are impossible in our organization, the things we can never do, right? So what's impossible in your organization? Well, we can never have more people, or we can never have more money, or the technology we need does not exist, or nobody is going to want that product if we build it, or it will never work. The things that are repeated over and over again so much that your organization almost believes that they're true. And go to 10. And then go through each of those things and go, what if? What if this is not true? What if this was not going to happen? So we were working with one project where the client had decided that they were not a hardware business, so working with hardware was never going to happen. It was not acceptable, did not have the competencies, But the project we were on would be greatly improved if we could actually place hardware out at their endpoints with their customers. So we did a small proof of concept where we took a piece of hardware and we actually placed it with their customers. Now, of course, did not work out. Not all of these stories can be success stories, because what happened was the hardware was not good enough and it was not able to do what we wanted it to do. So, we learned that the tech wasn't mature anyway. But what the company understood was that, hey, maybe we are a hardware company. Maybe we should build a hardware team. And over time, they actually started getting people working with not soldering and building a hardware, but working with off-the-shelf hardware in order to program components that they could eventually place with their clients, instead of just working with buying ready-made products. So, they saw that maybe that thing that they believed was true was not. So now if you've done this exercise, you've done it alone as a thinking exercise, you've done it with your team, you should have 40 ideas. Not 40 good ideas, just 40 ideas about what you could potentially change. And the last thing you need to do in a 5-step process is you only need to pick one thing. It's the same thing as with continuous improvement. And now you need to figure out the experiment. If we change this one thing, how do we believe? What is our hypothesis? How do we believe that that is going to move the measurement we set out in the right direction? And then measure the results, right? And then you need to see, when you change that thing, does that have a positive impact on the measurement you created, or negative impact? If it's a positive impact, you keep it. If it's a negative impact, you roll it back and you go to another idea. So this is the end of the presentation. I just want to leave you with the 5 things to take away. One is, don't copy blindly. And what I mean by that is, don't take full processes or full ways of working from other companies and try to roll them out inside of your company as a big splash. You can take specific practices that you think might work inside of your context or your company, adapt them to your own needs and deploy them. Sure, if you think written narratives is good for your company, run with that, or anything else. But don't copy full-on processes, because they were not created for your company. Continuously improve. If you're not already running retrospectives or any other way of continuously improving your ways of working, you should start tomorrow. It's really easy. It's super simple to get started. And if you need help, get a retrospective coach. It only takes a few days for them to show you the ropes. Lastly, measure what matters. This means, again, pick the measurements that you actually want to see results on. Don't go for fake measurements as story points or hours, lines of code, or features delivered. All of those things your organization does not really care about. They care about other things. And then disrupt deliberately. If you're stuck, if you feel that you're stuck in a rut, find ways to putting your process out of balance intentionally, in order to elicit new creative ways of working, and design these experiments. Add things, remove things, change things, question things, but then keep your focus. Only pick one thing to work on at the time, because otherwise, if you turn on all the knobs, you won't really know which one gave you the right effect. Thank you so much for listening, and I really do hope we have at least a few questions.
We do. Speaking of question everything, we have a question from Ebba Lauren, PhD, who asked, what do you see as significant hinders and enablers?
Significant hinders and enablers. It's an interesting question. Is that in general, or for something specific?
Well, Ebba is still here, if I'm not mistaken. Ebba, would you like to ask directly?
In terms of implementing, it is not only the practice of reflecting, learning, continuously improving, but also it is culture making in the making. So what do you see as the hinders and barriers of that? Because, I work a lot with leadership and strategy.
Yes.
So I see a lot of hinders there in terms of control and building structures when they start feeling the effects of uncertainty and complexity. Whereas I think it's so sound to have that laser sharp focus in experiment and evaluation. So I'm going to rephrase it. The hinders and enablers in terms of shifting that, leveraging the practice of continuous improvement to implement a culture of continuous improvement.
Well, I think it all comes down to empowerment and accountability, because you need to feel. There's one exercise I do, which is kind of the circles of influence, and what the things we can influence as individuals, the things we can influence as a team, and then the things that are outside of our control. And when I see teams mapping those things out, and there's a lot of things that fall outside of their control, or at least it feels like it's outside of their control, then there's really very few things that they can change, even if we run continuous improvement processes, right? Because now they're all of a sudden locked down. And of course, that might be real, that they can't affect the things, or it might just be perceived. So I always challenge teams to go like, is this real? Like, what if you try to change it? Like, what if you try to go there? But of course, if you have a culture which is based on a top-down hierarchy where you have the feeling that you're not allowed to change things, or you're not empowered to do so, and you don't feel accountable for results, all of these things become harder. Well, I think, don't go to deliberate disruption, but if you stick with continuous improvement practices, after a while, you're going to see that your circle of influence is actually larger than you thought.
Thank you, Eba, and thank you, Martin. Do we have maybe any other questions from the attendees of the webinar? We went a little bit over the time frame that we set, but if you allow, I have one more question before we finish, if there are no others. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Martin, thank you so much for using Victoria, our CMO, for disruption deliberately. It gave me like a real chuckle, and I bet Victoria as well. But I did want to ask you, with all the uncertainty in the world right now, is this really a good time to disrupt deliberately?
Well, this is, again, it comes down to these two parameters: working within the context and working on the context. If your company is in a situation where you feel that the outside things are already changing your context so much that you can't keep up with, working within the context, it's not a good time. But a lot of the organizations that I see, especially inside of product development or digital organizations, even though there's a lot of uncertainty going on, they still feel very stagnated. It still feels like, they need a push to do something more interesting or something different. And this might be for, big stable organizations that have a big stable product and they don't really feel threatened by anything. Then it might be a good idea. But now, if your organization is already struggling with keeping up with uncertainty in the world, please don't do that. Just, stick with the continuous improvement. And stick with trying to make sense of the situation as it is.
Amazing. That was very well put. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you again, Martin Mazur, for all of this amazing knowledge nuggets. Have a great day, everyone. And I hope to see you on the next webinar. Hela Victoria. There we go. Our disruptor. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.